Shabbos Daf Gimel, I apologize that we fell behind on videos because of Purim and the seam that we had in Shushan Purim. Be'ezer Hashem, by tomorrow we'll be all caught up. According to Shmuel, anytime it says in our Masechta that a person that does a melacha that has action to it, he's pater, it means pater aval asur. Midrabanan, it is asur. Besides 3 cases that a person took action and it's completely mutter, even midrabanan. And that is, if person A traps a deer in a room and he stands by the door, he's chayiv midaraisa. Person B comes and keeps him company for a minute, and then person A disappears. Person B is completely pater because he didn't add anything to the trapping. In the case where a person traps a snake because he's worried that the non-poisonous snake will bite him and cause him pain, he's completely pater and mutter because he's not doing it to catch a snake, he's doing it to prevent himself harm. And the third case is, if a person removes pus from within a zit, he's completely pater and mutter because he's not trying to make a hole in his body, he's trying just to remove and relieve the pain. Our Mishnah in the ratio where a person extends his hand and he's just passive, and somebody puts an object from one domain to into another domain, into his hand, it's pater and mutter. But the reason why it's not brought down in Shmuel's cases is because he didn't take any action. He's passive, he's just standing there. In our Mishnah, we have 8 cases. The first 4 cases are cases where people are chayiv midaraisa on the Isra of Eitzah, and that is because they accomplished 2 things. They did an akira and a hanacha. They uprooted an object from one domain and placed it in another domain. The 4 cases in the Seifa, it was a combination of 2 people. One did an akira, one did a hanacha. Now, if you look at it, it's 8 cases, but in fact we have 16 cases because we're talking about 16 different individuals. And in some cases, one individual did an akira, the other individual did a hanacha, and it's 2 different cases, 2 different isurim. Why doesn't the Mishnah count them as 16 cases? Well, the first 4 cases you can't count as 8 cases because the second individual is completely pater and mutter. He's not doing anything. He's just standing like a statue, holding out his hand. So we're not going to count those 4 cases as 8 people. But what about in the Seifa, that the 4 cases are 2 individuals? One is doing an akira, that should be 1 halacha, and one is doing a hanacha, and that should be a second halacha. We should count those 4 cases as 8 cases. The answer is because the Mishnah is only counting cases that could lead us to an Issa Deraisa that you would have to bring a carbon. The only person that could get to that case of Issa Deraisa is the person that starts the melacha. The person that does the akira, he could also do hanacha. But the person that does the hanacha can never get to Issa Deraisa because he didn't do the beginning of the case. He only did the end where you have to do an akira and hanacha in order to be chayv deraisa. Even though 2 people did one melacha, there's no reason to have them bring a carbon because the pasuk says, "Me'am haaretz ba'asoisa." One person who does the entire melacha brings a carbon. Shnayim sha'asua p'turim. 2 people that do a melacha are pater. Rav asked Rebbe, what's the halacha if a person doesn't lift up the object, rather his friend puts it on his shoulder and he starts walking? Says Rebbe, walking is considered an akira. You lift up your feet and you move outside. However, a hand is not considered an akira. Why? Because the hand never moved. The hand is part of the body. It's moving, but the body never moved anywhere. Says Reb Chia, who is Rav's uncle, he tells Rav, didn't I tell you many times, don't ask your Rebbe questions in another Masechta where he's not holding. You might embarrass him. What if he doesn't know the answer and he might say something wrong? You're lucky that Rebbe is a gadol and he knows everywhere, and in fact, he said exactly like it says in the Braisa. Says Abaye, we see from the fact that if an ani, a person standing in Rosh Hashanah and extends his hand into Rosh Hayachid, and somebody removes the object from his hand, we don't view that removal of the object from his hand as if he removed it from Rosh Hashanah, although the person's body is in Rosh Hashanah, but his hand is somewhere else. On the flip side, if somebody standing in Rosh Hashanah extends his hand into Rosh Hashanah and somebody removed an object from his hand, we don't view it as if he removed it from Rosh Hashanah, even though his hand is an extension to his body. But asks Abaya, maybe we should view that hand. You're right, the hand is not Rosh Hashanah and it's not Rosh Hashanah. It doesn't go by the body and it doesn't go where it's at. It's something in between. Perhaps we should view it as the Rabbanon Carmelis. In other words, it should be a penalty here. For somebody that extends his hand out into another domain, he should not allow to be able to bring his hand back into the original domain as a penalty. Now, the Gemara brings a contradiction from 2 brises and makes 6 pshatim. How we could explain the contradiction. One brisa says that if you extend your hand into another domain, you're allowed to retrieve your hand and bring it back into the house. The other brisa says that if you take your hand from Rosh Hashanah and put it into Rosh Hashanah, you're not allowed to retrieve your hand. So the Gemara, pshat number 1, maybe The Brises argue whether or not your hand is considered a karmelis, just like Abaye's question. If it's considered a karmelis, I can understand that you're not allowed to bring your hand back in, because you're not allowed to bring one domain into another domain. Another pshat is, everybody agrees that the hand is a karmelis. But we all know that above 10 tfachim in Rosh Hashanah is not considered Rosh Hashanah at all. It's a makom ptur. So one Bryce is talking about that he extended his hand over 10 tfachim. Therefore, he's allowed to bring his hand back in, because it's not going from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. But under 10 tfachim, you're not allowed to bring your hand back in. Another pshat is, no, everybody's talking about, both Bryce are talking about below 10 tfachim. And the question is, one Bryce is talking about that he extended his hand before Shabbos, on Friday. Therefore, he's allowed to bring it back in. Says the Gemara, well, you could say a reverse logic here. If a person extends his hand before Shabbos, perhaps he shouldn't be allowed to bring his hand back in. Why? Because even if he would bring his hand back in on Shabbos, he wouldn't be over Issa D'Oraisa. Even if he put the object that he's holding in his hand down in Rosh Hashanah, he wouldn't be over Issa D'Oraisa. Why? Because he started the Akira on Friday. In order to be over Issa D'Oraisa, you have to do Akira and Anoch on Shabbos. Whereas if he extended his hand on Shabbos and he put the object down after he got tired, let's say, in Rosh Hashanah, then he'd be over D'Oraisa. Maybe in that case, we are lenient with him and say that he's allowed to bring his hand back in. Says Gemara, well, if that's the case, if you're using that logic, then the question that we're going to have tomorrow, in a situation where a person puts bread in an oven on Shabbos, and it takes a couple of minutes for the bread to bake, and he realizes that they're going to stone him if the bread bakes, is he allowed to remove it on Shabbos? Now, removing bread on Shabbos, Redia, is Isur D'Rabbanan. Do we allow him to do Isur D'Rabbanan to save his life? According to the way you just told me, you're allowed to. Because the Rabbanan didn't say that a person should lose his life because of this, the Rabbanan. So the Gemara goes into that. Do we say that kind of svara or not? Another explanation to explain the contradiction in the Brises is, one Brise that says you're allowed to bring your hand back is talking about that he did it by accident, b'shaygi. But the Brise that says that you can't bring your hand back out is talking about that he did it b'mezid. Another pshat is, both of them are talking that he did b'shaygi. The question is, do we penalize somebody for doing a shaygi because he might lie in a case that he did mezid? Anytime somebody does mezid, he'll say, well, I can bring my hand back in because I was a shaygig. And finally, the Gemara says everybody might agree that we don't penalize somebody shaygig atu mezid. So what's the question? The question is, in a case where a person extended his hand and put the object in his friend's chatzar, that's when it's asr. But if a person brings it back into his own chatzar, that's when it's mutter, because he didn't accomplish anything. He didn't remove something from his domain. Whatever he tried to do, it went right back to where it was, and therefore that is mutter. Have a wonderful day.